Hello, this is Jody Cornelius. I'm doing my presentation on Robert C. O'Brien. A little bit about Mr. O'Brien. He was born Robert Leslie Carroll Conley, July 11, 1918, in Brooklyn, New York, to parents Agnes O'Brien and Leslie Marsland Conley. While his real name is or was Robert Conley, for the ease of understanding, I will refer to him as O'Brien for the presentation, even when discussing his work created under his birth name. His parents were both teachers when they had met, but by the time Robert was born, his father had moved on from teaching and into a position as a reporter for the New York Herald Tribune. He was the third of five children. He attended parochial schools in his youth. Uh, his father was actually the head of a charitable organization that operated summer camps to poor city children, and Robert and his siblings all worked as camp counselors for the camps in their youths. He was a very sickly and fearful child, and he suffered from anxiety throughout most of his life. His health concerns actually kept him from being drafted for World War II under a 4F classification. He attended Amityville High School and then began his college career at Williams. He dropped out of Williams due to stress, but later attended Juilliard for music. He played the piano. And finally, he received his BA in English through Rochester University. And he worked in journalism throughout his life. He married Sally McClaskland in 1943, and together they had four children. He ended up purchasing a home in a rural Virginia area in 1950, and that's where he developed this love of nature and of the natural world. And that's also when he began writing his fiction professionally. So he began writing fiction for younger audiences in his 40s, and his first novel was not published until he was 50 years old. He did have a pretty small body of fiction work. He only had four published titles. Part of that is because he died at the age of 55 in March of 1973. His last novel was actually published after his death. It was completed by his daughter using notes from that Robert had left behind. So his writing career. O'Brien's writing career started through journalism, which he did throughout his life under his birth name. He wrote for and was an editor for multiple publications, Newsweek, the Washington Times Herald, and most famously, National Geographic. That's where he was till he passed. His first novel, The Silver Crown, was published when O'Brien was 50 years old. Again, he did not start writing his fiction professionally until after he had moved with his family to that farm in rural Virginia. His fiction was published under the name Robert C. O'Brien to keep his journalism career and his creative writing career separate. He chose the pseudonym O'Brien for his fiction as an homage to his mother, which was his mother's maiden name, and also as a way of connecting himself to his Irish Catholic heritage. Regarding his pseudonym, in the 1978 fourth book of Junior Authors and Illustrators, published after his death, his wife wrote, quote, "He chose to write under a pen name because the Geographic frowned on outside writing by members of its staff, and until his death, it was not generally known that Robert L. Conley, senior assistant editor of the National Geographic magazine, and Robert C. O'Brien, fiction writer, were one and the same." But let's talk about his fiction writing. He did only publish four novels, the last of which, Z for Zechariah, was published posthumously. In total, his four novels were The Silver Crown, published in 1968, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim, published in 1971, A Report from Group 17 from 1972, and finally Z for Zechariah in 1974. The Silver Crown and Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim were both written specifically with a child audience in mind. Uh, a report from Group 17 and Z for Zechariah were originally written with adults in mind, though they were enjoyed by younger audiences as well. And all of his books were published by Atheneum. Some of the themes of his writing. They all contain similar themes, even though the stories are quite different. Themes of survival in the face of adversity, moral and personal responsibility, internal courage and the importance of finding and building community, understanding and respecting the power of nature and our place in it, and understanding the aspects of institutional power and the ability for power to corrupt. Again, for the fourth book of Junior Authors and Illustrators, his wife wrote, two aspects of Robert C. O'Brien's writing seem closely related to his actual life. One, his fascination with the lore of nature, which he so lovingly details, and two, his sympathy for and understanding of children. Perhaps harking back to his own struggle to grow up, he never forgot what it was like to be young and vulnerable. And he is able to make the reader share his concerns for the weak and defenseless, whether his characters are animal or human. So let's look closer at his four works. First one being The Silver Crown, published by Athenaeum in 1968. There's the cover of the first edition. It's O'Brien's first novel. A little bit about the plot. It involves a character named Ellen Carroll. She receives a strange silver crown for her 10th birthday, after which she experiences some strange events and witnesses a murder, both involving strangers with green hoods. Finding her home burned down and her family gone, she attempts to flee to Kentucky to be with her aunt, and on the way enters into the woods. Within the woods, she finds a castle, and within it, a mysterious machine called the Hieronymus machine. She discovers that this machine has the ability to control people's minds, turning them into arsonists and assassins. The machine she discovers is controlled by two crowns, including the silver crown that is in her possession. Knowing that the risks at hand, she destroys the machine rather than take control of herself, even though she would be able to control it with that silver crown, the more powerful of the two, because she understands the importance of free will and the risks of authoritarian control. So, after it was originally published for the British release, he actually rewrote the ending, cut it down quite a lot. Uh, the modified ending changes a few things, like the original ending, the crown may have searched for Ellen on its own due to her pure heart, and it was possibly snuck in to her bedroom by a member of the Green Hoods due to some unknown command. All of it is left pretty mysterious as to what happened, and there are multiple pages of theory. But in the ending, the crown was simply something that her aunt found for sale in a curio shop in Spain and sent it to her. It's an interesting change, and I don't necessarily know why it was done, unless it was just like to make the story button up easier. The original ending had a lot of maybes and speculation that the modified ending doesn't. But usually, when the book is published or printed again today, both endings are included. So it was hard for me to find professional reviews that were written back when the book was originally published. It was also hard to find professional reviews that were written after the fact. There were non-professional reviews online, but I wanted to stick with more professional reviews throughout this presentation. I was able to find the original Kirkus review from 1968, which stated that the Silver Crown, quote, suspends disbelief without straining credulity. Although the review did mention that the origin of the machine, like why it existed, was told somewhat clumsily, and some of the events that Ellen faced seemed, quote, even in retrospect, unnecessarily outlandish, and the connection with acuity is crude. I did find a review of the audiobook from AudioFile. Um, Mostly it just talked about the narrator itself, but it did say that, quote, this is not one of O'Brien's strongest offerings, but it makes for a satisfying listen, which that's positive enough. All right, so next, probably his most famous book, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim, published by Athenaeum in 1971. There's the original first edition cover with illustrations by Zena Bernstein. As mentioned, this is probably O'Brien's most famous novel. It follows the story of Mrs. Frisby, who's a widowed field mouse. Her family has to move out of the area of the garden that they live in over the winter time because the farmer is about to break ground with the tractor after the frost has gone away. Um, Unfortunately, Mrs. Frisbee's son Timothy falls ill and is too sickly to move, and is she's told by a doctor mouse that if a cold wind comes too fast, it could kill him even after he gets medication. He has pneumonia. Um, so she obtains this medicine to make him feel better, and then she seeks out the help of the wise owl to find out what to do. Through the owl, she learns of the rats. Um, she discovers that they were former lab rats, test animals who escaped the lab NIM. Uh, this testing gave them advanced intelligence and capabilities that they use to build machinery and have electricity and have their own society. Throughout the story, we learn more of Mrs. Frisbee's late husband, James, and the connection that he had to the rats and the other animals in her homeland. And this last thing, this is just my personal speculation, but I wonder if the character of Timothy, the child who Mrs. Frisbee has who was sick, may have been inspired by his own O'Brien's own experiences as a child being quite sickly. Again, that's just my personal speculation. So it was actually the inspiration for the animated film The Secret of Nim, filmed by Don Bluth, based on the novel. This is actually Don Bluth's directorial debut. There's a few differences between the movie and the book, as one would expect with any adaptation, but the three biggest are some names were changed, like Mrs. Frisbee became Mrs. Brisby. I assume that has to do with like Frisbee being a toy company, a trademarked name, so they didn't want any legal trouble there. There is a major character in the film who dies, who does not die in the book. But the biggest thing is the movie is very much a fantasy movie, where the book is much more science fiction and nature fiction, animal fiction. The rats in the book use machinery to try to move the Frisbee family, but in the movie, it's all done with a magical amulet and the power of belief. There's a lot of magical elements in the film that had no basis in the actual novel. What's interesting is they both tackle the same general idea of internal strength and perspicacity, but they do it in completely different ways. It's just an interesting change. Anyway, back to the book itself. Reviews of Mrs. Frisbee and the Rest of Them were positive. In 1971, the book list called the book, quote, a thoroughly enjoyable animal fantasy that seems almost believable. Writing for the Hornbook magazine in 1971, Mary Burns called it, quote, an unusual addition to the stories of animal communities, which have fascinated children for generations. Mary Burns also praised the illustration work by Zena Bernstein in the original edition. The bulletin for the Center of Children's Books in 1971 in October stated that Mrs. Frisbee and the Rest of Nim was, quote, deftly told, fulfilling the first requisite of fantasy by making the impossible believable. So this book actually won the Newbery Award in 1972. Um, Due to O'Brien's use of a pseudonym to protect his identity and keep his journalism career separate, his acceptance speech was given by editor Jean E. Carl. Uh, in the acceptance speech, O'Brien discusses questions that he had been asked, like why did he write about rats? Because people think that rats are disgusting, or why write for children? About the rats, he said that he doesn't remember why he chose rats, but he was always interested in their hardiness. Maybe this is connected to his themes in general. The better response, though, was to the question about why he writes for children, and his answer was simple. He stated, quote, I would prefer to rephrase the question. Why is it good to write books for children? The answer to that is easy, because it is good for children to read books. As I had mentioned, this book was adopted into the film The Secret of Nim. Um, Multiple sequels to the book were written by O'Brien's daughter, Leslie Conley. And the film itself also has a sequel called The Secret of Nim 2, Timmy to the Rescue, that had nothing to do with Don Bluth or the books by Leslie Conley or the original book. It was its own separate direct-to-video thing. Next book. So this is a report from Group 17, published by Athenaeum in 1972. There's the first edition cover. This one is dystopian science fiction written for an adult audience. It was written during the Cold War. and ongoing fears of development of weapons like bioweapons was in the air and played a big part in this story. Basic plot is 12-year-old Allison Adams, while sitting in a tree near Villa Petrograd, a Soviet embassy notices a collection of monkeys, and these monkeys have been slowly dying. The readers discover that the Soviets, under the direction of a former Nazi, have been developing bioweaponry and using the monkeys as test subjects. Allison is discovered spying, and then she is kidnapped, and experimentation starts being done on her. Um, the experiments are leading to something called polywater, with this chemical that is believed to be able to turn people into the Untermensch under their control. So the story is about Allison, but it's more told through the eyes of those who know her and are looking for her, and it follows multiple viewpoints. So what's interesting is the story doesn't actually feature Allison all that much after the first few chapters, even though it continues to revolve around her. This technique was actually cited as an inspiration for the interactive fiction story Photopia by Adam Kadri. Few reviews. So, since this book was written more for adult audiences and outside of the purview of this presentation, I'll just touch on one review from Kirkus. The review likened this story to that of Michael Crichton's Andromeda Strain. You can pause to read the review if you would like. They praised the writing and the flow of the story, stating that the story is, quote, just as it should be, congealing and urgently convincing, and you'll be turning pages with bitten fingernails. His final book was Z for Zachariah, again published by Athenaeum, the same in 1974. There's the first edition cover. I really like that cover. I think it's really cool. This was O'Brien's final novel. It was completed posthumously by his daughter Jane using notes that her father had left while he was in the middle of writing. It tells the story of Anne Burden, who's a 15-year-old girl. She's living alone in a secluded valley after nuclear war. For some reason, the valley that she's in is like this geographic anomaly that lets her stay safe and protects it from the radiation. She believes that she's the last human alive until she notices one night on the horizon a column of smoke, and then the smoke gets closer and closer and closer over the days until one day a stranger shows up. She hides and but eventually comes out and finds him. He is absolutely delirious with radiation sickness. She nurses him back to health. This man, John Loomis, we learned was in a feud with another person named Edward over a radiation protection suit. Um, he believes that Edward is still after him. We learn later that, spoiler alert, he actually killed Edward and took the suit for himself. So throughout the story, tensions between these two, uh, Loomis and Anne, develop. He clearly wants to control her. He's very combative throughout the novel. Um, Eventually, Anne does make her escape, taking his radiation suit and setting off to find other survivors away from the valley. This book actually received the Edgar Award in 1976 for Best Juvenile Mystery. This one was also made into a film in 2015, I believe, directed by Craig Zobel, apocalyptic science fiction film. So the film I have not seen, but I've read about. It seems like it's very different from the book, like more so than even The Secret of NIMH. Some differences are Anne's age is raised, like she's 15 in the book. It's not defined in the film, but she's assumed to be an adult based on s- activities that happen. The book is kind of more of a psychological thriller, where the movie is less so. Loomis in the book is portrayed as pretty much shamelessly evil. In the film, he's much softer and his character is portrayed much more sympathetically. Also, like the biggest thing, a third character is added out of nowhere. A third character named Caleb added as love interest for Anne. So in the book, Anne and Loomis end up very much apart. Like she escapes the valley and all that. Where in the film, Loomis and Anne end up living together, even though uncomfortably in the valley. couple reviews for Z for Zachariah. Kirkus from 1975 mentioned how O'Brien wrote 2 juvenile novels and 1 adult novel, stating that his final novel had, quote, a little of each for both audiences, and stated that readers will, quote, find Anne's level of resourcefulness as insulating as that safe suit, referring to the radiation suit, but that, quote, less convincingly so as her absolute naivete in a day and age which had just come to end. Sarah Hall, writing for the New Statesman in 2017, called the book a, quote, subversive retelling of the Adam and Eve story, and added that, quote, today it resonates, exploring the gender struggles that systematic collapse creates and oppressive regimes impose. Pamela D. Pollock, writing for a school library journal in 1975, said that, quote, O'Brien's posthumous disaster drama pits lone survivors of nuclear war in a deadly battle of the sexes. Pollock very much creates or credits O'Brien's skillful use of building tension and O'Brien's ability to write a, quote, chase so chillingly calculated that Anne is stalked by a rifle-toting madman on a tractor. That virtue triumphs ending comes as a much-needed release from the unnerving suspense. So, Herbert C. O'Brien, he had a short career, fiction-wise, but I feel is pretty impactful. Um, Showed some staying power, especially with Mrs. Frisbee and the rest of them, and more recently Z for Zachariah. His work often focused on ethical questions and concerns. A lot of this in his writing likely came in part from his lifelong career in journalism. And that is speculation on my part, but it just seems to make sense thematically. His novels went beyond simple adventure stories and more deeply explored themes of morals, personal responsibility, ethics, and understanding of what drives an individual to rise in the face of adversity. And there's some references. Thank you so much.